In the same week that America touched down on the moon for the first time in 50 years, setting the country up for an age of scientific progress, Republicans in Alabama are trying to drag us back to the Stone Age. At this point, it doesn't seem hyperbolic at all to claim that the conservatives' utopian future is effectively the Handmaid's Tale, and the Alabama Supreme Court's recent decision brings them one step closer to achieving completely abolishing women's rights to bodily autonomy. So join me this week as we grit our teeth and tell the country we told you so on this episode of Progressive Matters.
Continues after the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that frozen embryos created during in vitro fertilization have the same rights as living children. Now, the state's largest hospital says that it will pause IVF treatments while it analyzes the court's decision.
The Alabama Supreme Court ruled this week that embryos created through in vitro fertilization are considered children. This has led to 3 IVF providers in the state suspending services as they considered the legal repercussions of the decision. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, many people, myself included, asked the question, what will they take away from women next? Taking away the right of women to make the choices that most affect them seemed like it would undoubtedly lead to the opening of the proverbial Pandora's box. People said, what about women that have been sexually assaulted? And conservatives said, you're just being dramatic. Of course there'll be provisions for that. And then, of course, a 10-year-old girl was assaulted in Ohio. And guess what? She had to go to another state to get an abortion because there was no provisions for that.
10 years old. 10 years old. Raped, 6 weeks pregnant. Already traumatized. Was forced to travel to another state. Imagine being that little girl. I'm serious. Just imagine being that little girl. 10 years old.
Ohio politicians even claimed her story was a hoax at one point. You know what, though? They're right. This whole situation they have created is unbelievable. We said physicians would be put at risk for choosing to do the right thing. Conservatives shrugged it off. And guess what? The physician in Indiana who performed the abortion was investigated. Of course, the attorney general in that case was actually the one who was found to be performing their job improperly. You don't say. We said women would be forced to carry non-viable fetuses to term, and conservatives said, well, now you're just making stuff up. Except we all know the story of Kate Cox, the mother of 2, who is attempting to have a 3rd child.
You probably by now have heard about the Kate Cox case. Earlier this week, her attorneys tell us that the 31-year-old left the state in order to get an abortion where it's legal. At that time, she was 21 weeks pregnant with a fetus that her doctors and attorneys described as having a deadly condition, and that Cox's health was also at risk if she continued the pregnancy.
She wasn't looking to terminate the pregnancy because she was some kind of deviant sex addict like Republicans want you to believe these women are. No. She was a mother trying to do the very thing these hypocrites claim they want women to do, have a child. When she received the absolutely soul-crushing news that her baby girl had a genetic disorder that 9 out of 10 children don't survive more than a year with, she had to make the hardest decision of her entire life. A decision that supposedly there would be an exception for in Texas law. Guess what? Somehow she didn't qualify. Imagine being pregnant with a child, then being told it would most likely live a week at best if it survived the pregnancy. Then when you try to terminate the pregnancy in hopes of at least being able to try again, as this literally may put any future pregnancy in jeopardy, the only way to get help you need is to take the state to court, where they, of course, determined she wasn't sick enough for the provision. Then she had to travel to New Mexico to finally receive the health care all women should have readily available to them, and the icing on the cake is her husband could have been sued by any Tom, Dick, or Harry for aiding and abetting, a suit that could lead to up to a $10,000 fine. Tell me again how these people are pro-family. We said this could put women's very lives in jeopardy, and conservatives said, you just want to murder babies. But ask Phillips in Tennessee. Once again, a woman trying to have a baby.
Her political campaign was inspired by a very personal journey, her pregnancy with her late daughter, Miley Rose. At the time of her pregnancy, Tennessee's trigger ban would have made it a felony for her to get an abortion in the state, even despite the risk the pregnancy posed to Allie's life.
Her daughter only had 2 of the 4 chambers of her heart formed, among many other severe congenital issues. The fetus was deemed incompatible with life. But once again, Tennessee didn't have provisions that would allow for the termination of this pregnancy. When Phillips finally got the help she needed, the fetus's heartbeat had stopped and she was in danger of going septic. She didn't want an abortion, she needed one. And these are everyday Americans. They aren't wealthy like these politicians. They had to drop everything during the most difficult part of their lives to take extraordinary measures to save what they could of their hopes and dreams. We said, if life begins at conception, what will happen to people in outlandish circumstances? We thought this was half a joke. We thought, would they outlaw masturbation? We thought, would they possibly punish women for their menstrual cycles? And conservatives laughed, and some of us even laughed with them. Because that would be absurd, right? Then a hospital patient in Alabama wandered into an area they weren't supposed to be in and dropped frozen embryos onto the floor. This should have been the end of the story. The family whose embryos were destroyed had every right to seek financial compensation for their loss, but not as a wrongful death suit, because embryos aren't children. But the Alabama State Supreme Court decided 8-1 that they were. This opens up innumerable amounts of questions about IVF and people struggling to start a family's access to it. Not to mention an entire world of potential crimes and accusations of crimes. This is exactly what we were worried about when they overturned Roe versus Wade. This is exactly what we said would happen when you allowed religious insanity to permeate our justice system. Chief Justice Tom Parker wrote in a concurring opinion, even before birth, all human beings have the image of God, and their lives cannot be destroyed without effacing his glory. Human life, Parker wrote, cannot be wrongfully destroyed without incurring the wrath of the holy God, who views the destruction of his image as an affront to himself. Parker argued in his opinion that the court was merely enforcing the Alabama state constitution, which was amended in 2018 to recognize the sanctity of unborn life. That principle has deep roots that reach back to the creation of man in the image of God, Parker said, quoting the book of Genesis. Parker sprinkled his opinion with a litany of religious sources, from classic Christian theologians like St. Thomas Aquinas and John Calvin to a modern conservative Christian manifesto, the Manhattan Declaration, that opposes anti-life measures. He also quoted a Bible verse that is legendary within the anti-abortion movement, in which God told the prophet Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." This needs to stop here, and it needs to stop now. Women are not cattle for breeding. Women are not some kind of vessel for your God's plans. Women deserve the right to make decisions that affect their health and their happiness, not some religious nut that resembles the underside of a 70-year-old ball sack. So if you want to make the decisions that matter in your life, if you want to make the decisions in your life that all people should have the right to make, vote for this guy in 2024. Because voting for Trump is a vote for the guy that put these people in place to overturn Roe versus Wade. Until next time, get educated and get out and vote.